Okay, great. We're gonna get started. So here to kick off our event is the Wonder Woman of all things, downtown Santa Cruz, Mayor Sonja Brunner. She is very familiar with the challenges of affordable housing due to her work on council, the Downtown Association, and serving on the board of the Housing Authority. So with that, Mayor Brunner.
Thank you so much, Diana. It's so wonderful to be here today with everyone. Happy Affordable Housing Month. What an amazing month. There have been so many events, and I'm happy to be part of them, this one included. We're here today to discuss the importance of the housing element update process and really how it impacts our city and our region and the supply of affordable housing, our housing development, and the growth, right? We have to make sure that fair housing is considered in our housing element. And I know in the city of Santa Cruz that we're working really hard to plan for affordable housing in some of our high resource neighborhoods, help create more equitable and inclusive neighborhoods, and really look at and update decades of policy that have created exclusion, racial and economic segregation, and housing shortages. So I know the planning process can be complicated and sometimes a bit confusing, but we're working through it. We're excited about it. It's an exciting time for affordable housing. I know through the Housing Authority, we have 700 housing vouchers in the pipeline. I see some Housing Authority folks here in attendance. Thank you. And you know, we also have in the pipeline our city's largest low-income housing project, the Downtown Library Affordable Housing Project in the pipeline, and many new units being built downtown in the core, especially. I think there's about over 600 affordable units and around 1,200 units total being built in our Pacific Station North, Pacific Station South. We have a lot going on and we're working really hard. We also have a groundbreaking tomorrow that I hope some of you will be able to attend. Show up by the metro station at 11 a.m. And thank you to Housing Santa Cruz County for acknowledging all the achievements the city has made in our housing goals, meeting some of our RENA housing goals, our regional housing needs assessment goals. And thank you. I'm going to hand it back to Diana.
Great. Thank you, Sonja. You made my job so much easier because I was about to repeat everything you just said. So my name is Diana Alfaro, and I am Vice Chair of Housing Santa Cruz County. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. The housing element is a once-in-a-decade opportunity for us to ensure that our housing needs are being addressed. So why are you here? Why were you invited? Some of you were invited and some of you just joined, and that's great. And why should you care? Well, you and your organizations are vital to the thriving community that is Santa Cruz County. You are major employers, service providers, advocates, artists, farm workers, students, teachers, healthcare workers, and everyone in between. You represent all types of members of this diverse community, many of which struggle with housing affordability. And to ensure that we are helping our essential workers, neighbors, and let's face it, some of us are struggling with housing too. You know, we want to make sure that we come together to advocate for more affordable housing, and this is the opportunity to do it, the housing element. So we hope that we can count on you and your network when it comes to advocating at public forums, planning commissions, city council, and supervisorial hearings. And with that, I'm going to kick it off now to my Housing Santa Cruz County BFF, the Iron Man to my Captain America, former mayor of the city of Santa Cruz, Don Lane. You're on mute, Don.
All right. Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you, Mayor Brunner. We're so glad you're with us to help launch this event today and to lead us in general in our work on affordable housing in this community. You should be seeing on your screen right now a poll to get a glimpse of our level of familiarity with the housing element process. So I hope you'll take a moment right now to respond to that. We'll just pause for a moment to see, give you a chance to do that. While you're doing that, I'm going to just give you a little outline of what we can expect during our hour together. First, we're going to hear from a view on affirmatively furthering fair housing. That's a good tongue twister, with Elizabeth Madrigal from Monterey Bay Economic Partnership's housing program. We're going to hear some perspectives on who needs housing in our community from Tom Stagg at Housing Matters. We're going to have a thoughtful look at what it takes to actually build affordable housing from Jan Lindenthal at MidPen. And then lastly, an overview of the housing element process from Rafa Sonnenfeld of YIMBY Law. But let's take a look at those poll results if we can. Okay, so we can see that this is a really good mix. Some folks who are really following this closely, but also some that are learning for the first time or just putting their toe in the water. And that's, we're glad to have all of you. It's important that we all find our way into this process. And that's what we're going to try and do today. So as I was, besides those guests, after those presentations, we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A. So please use the chat as your way of submitting a question if you have one anywhere along the way, but we won't probably address those until the end. So as I mentioned a moment ago, our first presenter is Elizabeth Madrigal. Elizabeth is a housing policy associate at the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership and also a planning commissioner in the city of Seaside. She also worked in affordable housing development after graduating from UC Berkeley before returning to our region to focus on housing policy. Her focus today is one of her passions as she does this housing work, and that is affirmatively furthering fair housing. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Great, let me just get my slides up. Perfect. Thank you, Dawn, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Before diving into the role of affirmatively furthering fair housing within the housing element process, it is important to situate this conversation against historical context. When we think about the state housing crisis that we are currently experiencing, it's important to acknowledge that it's rooted in a history of racism that was carried out by private society and all three levels of government through exclusionary actions and racialized housing policies. On the note of racialized housing policies, there are a couple of key areas that come to mind. The first of these being redlining, which refers to a practice that began as part of the New Deal in the 1930s when the federal government began offering government-insured mortgages to Americans through the newly formed Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC. The HOLC instituted color-coded maps of neighborhoods within the US. Neighborhoods that were home to Black, Latino, communities of color, immigrant communities, or even integrated communities were deemed as risky, meaning that those neighborhoods were actively denied federal investment while white households benefited from this very investment and were able to build and accrue generational wealth. The second area of historically racialized housing policy I'd like to mention is exclusionary zoning. Prior to the 1968 Fair Housing Act, it wasn't uncommon for homes and entire subdivisions to have racial covenants. These racial covenants explicitly barred Black, Indigenous, and people of color from purchasing or renting these homes and entering white neighborhoods. Another less explicit example of historically racialized housing policy is single-family zoning. Even single-family zoning has segregationist roots. For example, in 1916, the city of Berkeley became the first city to adopt single-family zoning, and this was done in order to create wealthy white enclaves that prohibited Black and Asian residents from entering the city limits. Today, Explicit exclusionary zoning has largely been done away with, but the impacts of this history are very real and continue to be felt by our communities. Some of these impacts include systematic disinvestment, prioritization of the construction of single-family homes, folks not wanting affordable housing to be built in certain neighborhoods, and the perpetuation of outdated planning philosophies that reinforce all of these consequences. With the setting of this history, we are now at something of a crossroads. Where do we go from here? What do we do now? If we acknowledge a legacy of historical racism, then we really can view the housing element update process as an opportunity to begin addressing these historic harms, as well as our current housing crisis. Through the RHNA process, we could absolutely expect to see increased zoning capacity within our neighborhoods, better access to housing, deeper affordability for our communities, and anti-racist housing policies. This now leads us to the present day and the opportunity that we have before us in affirmatively furthering fair housing. So what is AFFH? A relatively new state law from Assemblymember Miguel Santiago out of the LA region, adopted in 2018, but really came into play January 1st of 2021. Under this legislation, all cities and counties within California must take affirmative and meaningful action to combat discrimination that overcomes patterns of segregation and integrates communities. The concept of AFFH is intended to combat housing discrimination, eliminate racial bias, undo historic patterns of segregation, and lift barriers that restrict access in order to foster inclusive communities and achieve racial equity, fair housing choice, and opportunity for all Californians. Housing elements must be viewed through the framework of affirmatively furthering fair housing. Jurisdictions must assess what the barriers to fair housing are within their community and how they will be addressed via implementable policies and programs. It's important to note that all jurisdictions within Santa Cruz County will be required to have policies, programs, and objectives that affirmatively further fair housing in their housing elements due December of 2023. In recent years, there has been a wave of reimagining what our zoning code is supposed to be doing and who it's supposed to be doing that for. There are a couple of places that have decided to explore how to upzone the base density of their communities. One of the first cities being Sacramento, whose city council passed a resolution where they identified the history of housing across this country, and certainly in the state of California, as being predicated on racially restrictive covenants. This resolution acted as the impetus in directing city staff to undo single-family zoning in Sacramento by changing their base density and allowing for a wide variety of housing types to be acceptable as by right development in their residential areas. Berkeley was next, with recognizing that almost 100 years after being the birthplace of single-family zoning, which had the effect of pushing non-white people to more impoverished neighborhoods in the South and West, they needed to work on righting the wrongs of the past, as well as addressing the current housing crisis. On March 25th of last year, the Berkeley City Council voted unanimously to end single-family zoning by the end of 2022. In 2021, Governor Gavin Newsom signed SB 9 and 10 into law, with SB 9 allowing up to 4 homes in most single-family zones, regardless of local zoning, and SB 10 allowing cities to streamline the upzoning of lots near jobs and transit. And something to ponder in this slide, who's next in addressing the issue of single-family zoning in the county? Santa Cruz, Aptos, Capitola? For this last slide, I'd like to leave you all with this visual as something to reflect on. There are significant geographical disparities in Santa Cruz County regarding areas of high and highest resource / low resource, as the crux of low resource areas are situated in South County. As we advance in this event, do keep in mind the necessity of ensuring that all in our county, no matter whether you reside in Watsonville, SoCal, or Santa Cruz, deserve to have the same access to quality education, transit, and employment opportunities. The way we've historically planned for housing and ultimately built it has produced inequitable and unfavorable outcomes. Now that every jurisdiction within Santa Cruz County is updating their housing element, it is as good a time as any to locally address such inequities. And now I will pass it back to Dawn. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And now, as we will continue to do during this seminar, we're going to have another quick poll. And I want to ask you to share your thoughts on what's the most important thing we can do to further fair housing. And I know it can be hard to pick just one, and you don't have to, but if you feel like one of these is the most important approach, please indicate that, because while many approaches will be necessary and useful, resources and capacities are limited. So your thoughts on the highest priority will be helpful as we move forward. So take a moment to make your selection. And let's see. We have another 10 seconds and then we'll show the results. And here they are. Okay, so it's a wide range of priorities, and that's good. I think we, again, we'll take this into account. I think we can all use this kind of information to think about helping set our priorities as we go forward. Next, it is my great pleasure to introduce my buddy Tom Stagg. Tom is the Chief Initiatives Officer at Housing Matters, which is the organization we used to call the Homeless Services Center. In his role at Housing Matters, Tom's responsible for managing shelter, support services, housing, employment, and day services programs. Every day, he and his team work directly with unhoused people who are seeking housing. Tom's going to give us a perspective on exactly who we are talking about when we think about who needs affordable housing in our community. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Don, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. As Don said in his introduction, we are a homeless services provider, but our focus over the last 5 to 10 years has really been to lean into housing. And while we still do basic services, our mission is to partner with individuals, families, and veterans to help them end their homelessness through housing. We serve about 200 households at a time who are searching for housing, mostly in Santa Cruz County. Last year in 2021, we helped to house 321 individuals, just to give you a scope of the services we provide with that housing happening all over the county in each of the cities and unincorporated areas, and a small percentage who move into housing outside of the county, usually in adjacent counties. We also have about 60 staff where affordable housing is a prominent focus day in, day out. So not only are we searching for the people that are our clients, we really see housing and affordable housing as an issue in retaining staff and recruiting staff. So day in and day out, our team is searching for housing, but it's also affecting them in their own lives, in their own home. To give you a snapshot of our staff, about 2/3 of them, about 40 of the 60 have a college degree, and the others are also skilled workers who are doing maintenance, social services, and institutional cooking for those folks that are on our campus, and really providing a service to all of us here in the county. About 50% of our staff work on campus. We have a 2-acre campus in the city of Santa Cruz, and in providing shelter and basic services like showers and bathrooms, you have to be on site. It's not a job that you can do remotely. Then about 50% of the other 50% do work primarily remotely, but with a hybrid presence. So they're doing housing search, connecting to landlords, meeting with people in the community to do supportive services, case management, and going to house showing, going to apartment viewings, connecting to landlords, so they can do part of that job remotely on the phone via Zoom, but it also entails having to set foot and see people face to face. Currently, my count is that only 3 of our staff live outside of Santa Cruz County today. It goes up and down, it fluctuates, but really what we see is when someone lives in Santa Clara County or Monterey County, their retention is really decreased just from the commute. So we're talking about a staff force that is local. One of the main reasons that they do the service that they do and they want to help is because we live here and they live here. So that's a kind of who we're talking about in terms of staff. And we follow the minimum wage at Housing Matters, the county's living wage, official living wage of $18.10 an hour, with most of that frontline staff making between $20 an hour and $30 an hour. So some skilled work professionals, but they're seeing a struggle when they're looking for housing. For those that we serve, we're also talking about groups with resources. You know, they're individuals, they're families, and veterans, and some of them have income from work or from benefits. And then a large group, we have over probably, you know, I'm not going to take a guess, but we have a lot of people also searching who have housing choice vouchers. So they have income in hand, good rental histories, and are facing the dilemma of low availability or competing with each other. From our staff, there's about 20 or 25 who their job is to connect with landlords, follow up on housing applications, and they're just crossing paths, running into each other at house showings. We, you know, our programs compete against each other to find housing. And also when one of our staff persons has to find housing, then they also are in that pool. And so the staff who are experts at filling out housing applications, experts at working with landlords, know how to be a good tenant, still feel that pressure of finding affordable housing. And every year we've, not only are there staff who are doubled up, they're staying with family, they're using whatever resource they can to be housed in Santa Cruz, we still see some staff who leave the county because of affordability and are going to places where either they see that they'll be able to thrive, or especially for those who plan to be homeowners, really see it as an impossible dream in the county. So it's something that we're seeing across the board. And when we look at housing openings, you know, we have about 200 people searching plus our staff, and there's only 200 to 300 open units advertised at a time, including the ones that wouldn't be affordable for them, or filtering out for those that are scams, or they've been up there for a long time. And it's really a struggle for the people that we're working with and our coworkers here at Housing Matters. What we do see is that it's really, it's, you know, like I said at the beginning, it's a day in, day out struggle, and something that we see for our staff, and is one that we see as a focus on how do we keep good people here in Santa Cruz County.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom. I'm going to take a break from our polling for this interlude and keep moving right along. So our next presenter is Jan Lindenthal. Jan is the Chief Real Estate Development Officer for MidPen Housing, one of the leading nonprofit affordable housing developers in California. She's overseen the construction of literally thousands of affordable homes and currently leads MidPen's development team, stewarding a pipeline of more than 25 development projects that could produce an additional 3,000 homes in the region. To put it simply, Jan is a superstar in the field of affordable housing development and was recognized as such this year by the Inspirational Nonprofit Leader of the Year by the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California. We're so fortunate to have Jan with us today. Welcome, Jan.
Thanks, Don. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Affordable Housing Month. I'm really pleased and honored to be here with all of you, and really appreciated hearing what Mayor Brunner and Elizabeth and Tom just shared. I'm going to share a little bit from the perspective of the affordable housing developer and how we get involved in the housing element process. Can you see my screen okay? All right, great, thank you. So as Dawn said, I am the Chief Real Estate Development Officer at MidPen Housing. We're a 50-year-old nonprofit. The mission statement that you can see here on this slide is the same one that our founders crafted 50 years ago. And we were founded really in direct response to the racist land use policies and exclusionary zoning that Elizabeth spoke about. We've been working here in Santa Cruz County for over 30 years, and we've developed 14 communities and over 700 homes right here in Santa Cruz County. Altogether, MidPen has developed more than 120 properties with over 8,000 units throughout the 11 counties that we work in throughout the Bay Area. So how do we engage in the housing element process as an affordable housing developer? Well, one of the things that we do is because we're working in so many jurisdictions with so many different cities and counties, we collect and share best practices from all across the region. And you can see the link at the bottom of this slide here where you can find some of these best practices on our website, and I'm going to highlight a couple of them. Our staff also participate in housing element task forces. For example, I'm serving on the task force in my hometown in the city of Pacific Grove, and we have MidPenners all over the region serving on these housing element task forces as individual citizens. We also provide comment on the site inventories that cities and counties are putting together. So as cities and counties are identifying the opportunity sites in their jurisdiction, they contact MidPen and ask for our input on how viable these sites are for affordable housing. So that's a very constructive way that we can engage to make sure that the sites that cities and counties are identifying are actually going to be feasible for affordable housing development. So to that end, what are we looking for? What makes for a good housing element site? First and foremost, we want to make sure that sites are well located relative to amenities, schools, and jobs. And amenities include things like, in addition to schools and jobs, grocery stores, medical offices, libraries, senior centers, things like that. And that's actually a very critical criteria for building affordable housing, because the state tax credit programs prioritize projects that meet that criteria of being well located relative to those amenities that I spoke about. The state also prioritizes sites that are well served by public transit. So that's another important criteria that we look for in looking at what makes for a good housing element site. Are the sites zoned for residential development, or can they be rezoned as part of that housing element update process? What kind of offsite improvements are required? Is there substantial road extension work that would need to be done, or other site work? Perhaps there's a lot of topography on the site that could impact the feasibility of the project. Those kinds of things, those offsite requirements or significant grades on the site can substantially increase costs and decrease the feasibility of the affordable housing sites. We also want to make sure that there aren't unusual easements like an underground gas line running through the middle of the site, perhaps an earthquake fault line, or other site constraints that can really severely limit the site capacity. So it might look like a great site, it might be multiple acres, but it's got some characteristics that make it virtually undevelopable. So that's another thing that we're really scrutinizing for as we're looking at potential sites. We want to try to identify sites that have limited or no environmental site constraints. That's meaning contamination. That's getting harder and harder these days, as so many sites are have some kind of history that can create some environmental remediation. An example that we're working on right now is our site in Live Oak, the 17th and Capitola Family Housing Project that we're building in collaboration with the Santa Cruz Health Center and Dientes, where there was offsite contamination that from a dry cleaner that has been gone for decades, that seeped into the groundwater and has created some soil contamination that our project has to deal with. That's not insurmountable. It can be done, but it's just the kind, as is proven at 17th and Capitola, because we're under construction right now. But it's just something that we want to try to be mindful of going into a potential project. And then, as Elizabeth spoke about earlier, we are trying to identify sites that are in those high and highest resource parts of the community. And we really want to make sure that we balance that with making sure that we're also developing in communities that need that continued investment. So there, we feel like it's a both and. We want to ensure that we're finding sites in those high and highest resource areas, and we're continuing to build in those communities that need investment. And then we're also looking for sites where there's going to be political and public support. And that's something that I think Rafa is going to speak to after me, but I'll just underscore here to say that one of the ways that we all as citizens can be involved in the housing element update process is by helping to support the opportunity sites that get identified as part of this housing element process. Because ultimately the elected officials that are going to adopt these housing elements, they're going to hear from a lot of people. And so they need to hear from us that these are good sites, that we think these sites are developable, and that we support their development. So when I think about some of the best practices for that have come out of housing elements, the one that's at the top of my list is what Santa Cruz County did back in 2007. So the county identified 6 sites that they zoned for affordable housing, and they did the environmental review. And what that meant was that those sites were fully entitled, ready to go. MidPen has had the opportunity now to develop 3 of those sites. We have a 4th one we'll start construction on next month. And that meant what we were able to do was step in and immediately begin securing the financing that we need to build the housing. So that the work that the county did to identify the sites, rezone them, do the environmental review was a huge accelerator to making that affordable housing happen. And there was a ton of advocacy that happened around that rezoning process. There were individual citizens. COPA was very involved. There were COPA leaders from all across the county that helped advocate for that. Because of course, those sites were rezoned for 20 dwelling units to the acre, which may not seem like a lot in 2022, but was a very considered very high density in 2007. And so it took a lot of that advocacy on the part of COPA and other citizens in the county and other leaders to be able to give the Board of Supervisors the support they needed to be able to upzone those sites. Kind of a related best practice that we've seen is an affordable housing overlay. So this was a policy that Menlo Park adopted in their last housing element cycle, where they identified opportunity sites in their city, and then they put an affordable housing overlay zone on those sites, which enabled the density to be dramatically increased above and beyond what state density bonus law would allow. And in this case, they put that affordable housing overlay over one of MidPen's properties. So it was a piece of property we controlled. We raised our hand and said, yes, please put that overlay on our property. And that allowed us to redevelop a site that was in desperate need of redevelopment and double the density. Another example was from the city of Half Moon Bay, where they wrote into their housing element and then in their zoning code criteria by which development exceptions could be granted that allowed, in this case, MidPen to exceed the height and parking ratio requirements that otherwise would have been applied to the project. And that enabled us to develop 100 additional affordable homes on a site that was controlled by the San Mateo Housing Authority. The final example I wanted to share is an example of the kind of site that we should be identifying now to include on the list of opportunity sites. So where is there land that is controlled by perhaps a mission-aligned organization, whether it's a nonprofit or in this case, St. Stephen's Lutheran Church, that are willing to have their land be identified in the housing element, perhaps be upzoned for affordable housing as part of the housing element update process. In this case, St. Stephen's Lutheran Church raised their hand and said, we have some vacant land behind our sanctuary. We want to make it available for affordable housing. St. Stephen's has been one of the founding members of COPA, so they and COPA leaders helped to advocate for that project. And we were able to build 40 affordable homes for extremely low-income seniors there. So that's an example of the kind of sites that can be identified through this housing element process that can then lead to the construction of affordable homes. And I will thank you very much and turn it back to Don.
Thank you so much, Jan. That was terrific. And now we are on to another poll, and I hope you'll take a minute. And again, this is challenging because obviously all these choices have importance, but if you can take a moment to think about for you, what is the single most important factor for selecting a site for affordable housing in our community, this would please pick one for us. And we'll give you a few seconds to do that. All right, I think we're ready to see the results. Okay. All right, so we have a pretty good distribution, a lot about location near either transit or the amenities that we talked about. So we'll keep those high on our list, I think, as we go forward. Thanks for answering that one. So coming up next is Rafa Sonnenfeld. And if I'm not mistaken, Rafa first jumped into affordable housing issues as a community activist working to address homelessness in our community. Through that work, his interest in larger housing issues grew and led him to his current position as Director of Legal Advocacy for YIMBY Law. He's also a lead with Santa Cruz YIMBY and was on the original steering committee of Housing Santa Cruz County. Rafa has become a true housing policy wonk, and I mean that in the very best way. He's going to share with us some of his expertise on the nuts and bolts of housing elements. Welcome, Rafa.
Thanks very much, Don. Let me share my screen here, and hopefully you all can see this. Okay. So as Don mentioned, I work at YIMBY Law, and we are the staffing organization for the Campaign for Fair Housing Elements here in California. And I'm just going to walk you through the big picture of the housing element process. So it starts with the regional housing needs allocation, which is basically the state determining what they think is the minimum number of affordable and market rate housing units that each region across the state needs. In our area, the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, or AMBAG, is our region's council of governments that goes through a process of allocating the units that are assigned to our region by the state. The RHNA is regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, is divided into different income categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. This is actually the housing unit need as determined by HCD, or the Department of Housing and Community Development of the state. And so for our entire region, you can see we have to plan for at least 33,274 homes across the region. Most of those actually are going to be very low, low and moderate homes. And although the individual largest category is above moderate. Where we currently are in the process, AMBAG started back in really spring and fall of 2021, determining, getting that allocation from the state. AMBAG has gone through a process of identifying a methodology to assign those units to jurisdictions, cities, and unincorporated counties across the region. And now we're basically in the middle, but really near the end of the final RHNA adoption, the final methodology in which these numbers become official. So there's a bunch of factors that the AMBAG had to consider: our regional growth forecast, employment, jobs housing ratio, access to transit, resiliency, like accounting for wildfire and sea level rise, affirmatively furthering fair housing, which Elizabeth mentioned earlier. And all of these combine into a big picture of allocating these units. And you can see the option that AMBAG has selected, option Z, includes a very large number of units based on affirmatively furthering fair housing. And that means assigning these units to jurisdictions that have high racially concentrated areas of affluence. I'm not going to go into all those details. This is a really complicated slide, but the basics are that at the end of the day, our region is looking at these specific allocations for very low, moderate, and above moderate. So for example, the city of Santa Cruz has to plan for 3,736 units. 859 of those are very low, etc. So the next step in the RHNA process, once the cities have finalized their numbers, and that's going to be happening within just a couple weeks, actually. AMBAG is going to be finalizing these numbers. Cities are going to have to start performing public outreach, and that means surveying the community, having workshops, webinars, the advisory committees that Jan mentioned earlier. These are all how our cities are going to be gathering community input, and that this community input has to be sought from all economic sectors of the community. We're currently, just getting started in this process. Each region is on a slightly different time frame. The Bay Area is wrapping up this process now, and Los Angeles is basically done. So the next step in the process is after there is community input, and there will continue to be community input throughout the process, but after the bulk of these task force sessions and workshops and things are completed, then it's really up to city planning staff, their planning, maybe a planning commission, and eventually getting to a city council approval of a draft housing element. And the draft housing element will identify potential sites, identify programs that affirmatively further for housing, and other statutory legal requirements of the housing element process. What's different about this cycle and the sixth cycle is that, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, SB 686 by Assembly Member Santiago was passed in 2017, I believe. And so this is the first cycle where affirmatively furthering fair housing is a factor in the housing element. And so what that means is cities can't put all of their sites, they can't segregate them all their low income sites into one neighborhood or into an unhealthy area like a warehouse district or near a highway. This is a map of the city of Santa Cruz's housing element sites in the fifth cycle, so the previous cycle that's just coming to an end. This is really, at the end of the day, what a city has to produce. These are the sites that the city planned to zone at high enough density that they can accommodate the affordable housing that we need in our community. Whether or not this map affirmatively furthers fair housing will we'll find that out in this next cycle. And HCD is going to be reviewing the housing element drafts, and the city will have to submit and adopt a draft, or adopt a final housing element by December 2023. And then HCD has basically 30 days to review that. So how you can help, we want you to advocate for fair and abundant housing. As I mentioned, I'm involved in the Campaign for Fair Housing Elements, and we need your expertise on policies and programs. We need your network to get the word out to your lists. And we're going to be having further housing elements events, educational events, like a Santa Cruz Housing Element 101 next summer, or later this summer. So this is an example of the type of program that that other community-based organizations in Menlo Park are doing to look at housing element sites. So I'm out of time. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity, and I would really encourage you to contact me via email. I really want to hear from you all about your interest in getting more involved, and how we can plan on working together to have good housing elements in this next cycle. Check out the website at fairhousingelements.org. There's a ton of resources there as well. Thanks, Don.
All right, thank you so much, Rafa. And I packed a lot of good information into that limited amount of time. So I'm kind of following up on Rafa's closing remarks there. We want to just invite you to think a little bit about how you or the organization you work with might get involved in influencing the housing element in your community. So take a second just to look at, these are not the only ways, but some of the easiest and most obvious ways to do that. So take a second and reflect on that, what seems best for you, and then cast a vote, and we'll see where we have people planning to work. And I guess while you're doing that, I'll also just remind, we will have time for a couple of questions. So if you pop a question in the chat, we might be able to get to it if we have time. So we've gotten a couple already. Okay, let's see what results we have here. All right, well, we're gonna have people doing lots of stuff. That's great. That's really excellent. So thank you, and we have no way to hold you to it directly, but we know you're gonna step up and get involved in this process. All right, so we have time for a couple of questions, as I said, and I know I have one that came in that I thought was a good one. Not quite sure who gets to try to answer this one, but we'll maybe Rafa or Jan might be the best ones. What's the potential in rezoning some of the industrially zoned lands to allow for more residential or mixed use development in those zones?
I can take a quick response to that, and then see, Rafa, if there's anything you want to add. I think those are real opportunity sites. The key is the county or the jurisdiction thinking about where they want to retain the economic development potential. So, for example, in Sunnyvale and Redwood City, there's a lot of formerly industrial buildings that are pretty underutilized, and so they targeted certain areas where they wanted to incentivize the rezoning of those sites. In other areas, they want to preserve that. So I think those are good opportunity sites, and it has to be consistent with how the county or the jurisdiction's looking at their economic development plans moving forward.
And I'd add, I think some commercial sites can be really good. Industrial sites can be somewhat problematic in terms of affirmatively furthering fair housing if there is too much pollution in that area, if it's, if there's a really high number of homes that are put there and not so many in better neighborhoods with better schools and access to opportunity. And so cities can do some upzoning for affordable housing in commercial and industrial sites, but actually the law expects more than half of those sites to not be to be in areas of high opportunity.
Great. Thanks. So here's another one. This one was, I think, particularly aimed at Elizabeth. I'm not sure you are familiar with this, Elizabeth, but I'll take a swing at it. That one of the participants asked about the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, I guess, which I'm assuming has to do with the idea of tenants being able to buy the rental housing that they live in. Are you familiar with that, and how might that play into our efforts?
Yeah, I am. I could speak to that a bit. So back when I worked in affordable housing development in San Francisco, the city of San Francisco has a program that's named the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. And for folks that might not be familiar with this program, what it does is it gives qualified nonprofit organizations the right of first offer and/or the right of first refusal to purchase certain properties offered for sale in the city. The whole impetus behind the creation of this program to prevent tenant displacement and promote the creation and preservation of affordable rental housing. So in San Francisco, the program hasn't been wildly successful up until now, mostly due to financing issues. But there have been about 300 units that have been preserved as a result of this program, which at the end of the day is still very meaningful to those individuals that are able to stay in the city. So I'd say that any and everything that jurisdictions can explore to preserve affordable units, along with more production, of course, just preservation would go miles. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything they would like to add.
Anyone else on the panel before we move on? All right. So another question that came up is, what if UCSC builds all the housing units they've been talking about building? Would that help our county and our city meet our RHNA goals?
Short answer, no. Dorms don't count towards the RHNA goal. So maybe if UCSC built housing that was available to everyone in the community and wasn't reserved exclusively for students, they could count some of those units. But housing built on campus or housing that's built just for students wouldn't count towards our obligation.
Okay, and then I think this might be our last question, and some of it was answered in the chat, but I think it's probably worth elaborating. What happens when a community does not produce an adequate housing element and does not meet RHNA goals?
There is a lot that can happen, actually. Well, those are two separate questions, but I'll answer the question about not meeting its goals first. Assuming a city has adopted a housing element and HCD has certified it as meeting the requirements of the law. If a city doesn't meet its low and very low income goals, then it can be subject to SB 35. Which basically takes away some local control to deny housing projects. We saw that in the city of Santa Cruz with the 831 Water Street project, because the city has not fulfilled all of its very low income housing obligations. The city was required to ministerially approve a streamlined process to approve that housing. If a city doesn't meet its above moderate housing goals, then any project that's 10% affordable or more gets that same streamlined treatment. If a city hasn't adopted a housing element by the statutory deadline, or HCD determines that it doesn't meet the requirements under the law, then there are all sorts of other types of penalties, ranging from losing access to state funding for transportation improvements, to potentially losing access to local land use control altogether if a city is sued and a judge essentially puts the city in receivership. So cities have a real incentive to make sure that they have a compliant housing element and have adopted by the deadline.
Thanks, Rafa. Is there anyone else want to contribute on that one? Okay, well, we are at 2 minutes before our ending time. And as we wrap up, I want to thank our partners who put this event together, YIMBY and Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, MidPen Housing, and Housing Santa Cruz County. And I want to give a special nod to Janine from Santa Cruz YIMBY for doing so much great behind the scenes work to make this event happen. And to Diana for bringing us all together and wrangling this event at the beginning. And again, thank you to our wonderful panelists, Elizabeth, Tom, Jan, Rafa. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to learn about what's ahead as we work together on housing elements, and for your continuing work in the months and years ahead just to meet our goals as a community. We have a long way to go if we're going to truly achieve an equitable and thriving community. And we're counting on you to stay involved and active. And I'm going to make a final plug as we close for one event that's coming up in about a week on the 25th at 7 o'clock in the evening. Housing Santa Cruz County has invited the leaders of all our local jurisdictions to come talk about their work on housing. And very specifically, one of the questions we've asked them to address is, how will your jurisdiction engage your citizenry in shaping your housing element? So this is a really important opportunity to kind of learn exactly how each jurisdiction is going to engage on this. So we hope you consider this last Affordable Housing Month event on your calendar. And with that, again, thanks all to everyone and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you all.